Talk Ava. Learn English with confidence.
Welcome back, everyone. I want to begin today's conversation with something that happened to me a few days ago. I was having lunch with a few friends, and somehow our conversation turned into a debate about the best season of the year. One person loved summer because of the long, sunny days. Another insisted winter was much better because they enjoyed cold weather and warm drinks. Everybody sounded completely confident, and after listening for a while, I realized something interesting. Nobody was really trying to prove anything. They were simply sharing how they felt.
I think that's a perfect way to start today's topic, because conversations like that happen everywhere. Families have them around the dinner table, friends have them in cafes, and coworkers have them during lunch breaks. People enjoy sharing their thoughts, and those discussions often become much more interesting than the topic itself.
That's exactly what made me curious. At one point, someone smiled and said, "Well, that's just your opinion." Nobody looked offended. Everyone laughed and continued talking. It made me wonder why native speakers naturally know when they're discussing facts and when they're simply sharing personal opinions.
That's because those conversations are part of everyday life. Native speakers don't usually stop and think, now I'm about to express an opinion. They simply react to the conversation naturally. Some things can be checked and confirmed, while other things depend entirely on personal preference.
I noticed the same thing later that evening. I called my brother, and somehow we started talking about coffee. He said it was the best way to begin every morning. I laughed because I still prefer tea most days. Neither of us expected the other person to change their mind. We were simply sharing what we enjoyed.
That's one reason conversations are so enjoyable. Imagine if everybody liked exactly the same food, watched the same movies, listened to the same music, and wanted to visit the same places. Conversations would become incredibly boring because there would be very little to discuss.
You're absolutely right. Differences make conversations interesting. Last weekend, one of my friends told me autumn was the most beautiful season because the weather felt comfortable and the trees changed color. Another friend immediately disagreed because she loved spring flowers much more. Listening to them made me realize that both people sounded equally convinced, even though they completely disagreed.
That's what I enjoy about everyday English. People don't always agree, but they usually enjoy hearing different perspectives. A conversation doesn't have to end with everybody reaching the same conclusion. Sometimes the best conversations simply help us understand why another person thinks differently.
I think that's an important lesson for English learners as well. Many students worry about saying the perfect thing, but real conversations aren't perfect. They're full of different ideas, different experiences, and different personalities. That's exactly what makes them feel natural.
I completely agree. Some of my favorite conversations have been with people whose opinions were completely different from mine. I didn't always leave the conversation with a new opinion, but I often left with a better understanding of another person's experiences.
That's probably why I enjoy podcasts so much. You hear people sharing ideas naturally instead of reading prepared speeches. They agree, disagree, laugh together, and sometimes even change their minds while they're speaking. That feels much more like real life.
Before we continue, we'd love to hear from you. What's one opinion you have that many people around you disagree with? It could be about food, movies, travel, or anything else. Leave your answer in the comments because it's always fun to discover how differently people think.
Your question reminds me of one of the funniest family dinners I've ever experienced. It started as a completely ordinary evening. Everyone was sitting around the table, enjoying dinner and talking about their week. Then my cousin casually announced that pizza was the greatest food ever created. He said it with so much confidence that everyone immediately stopped eating and looked at him.
I already know this conversation didn't end quietly. Food has an amazing ability to turn peaceful family dinners into friendly debates within a matter of seconds.
That's exactly what happened. My aunt smiled and said she completely disagreed because nothing could ever be better than homemade pasta. Before anyone else could respond, my uncle joined the conversation and proudly declared that spicy curry deserved first place instead. Within a minute, everyone around the table had chosen a different favorite meal.
I love those conversations because nobody is actually trying to win. Everyone knows they're talking about personal taste, but they still enjoy explaining why they love certain foods. Sometimes the stories behind the food become even more interesting than the food itself.
That's exactly where the conversation went. My cousin explained that pizza reminded him of Friday evenings with his friends after school. My aunt talked about learning family recipes from her grandmother. My uncle described traveling abroad and discovering new flavors. Suddenly, the discussion wasn't really about food anymore. It became a collection of personal memories.
That's such a wonderful example because our opinions are often connected to our experiences. Two people can eat exactly the same meal and have completely different reactions because they bring different memories and emotions to the table.
A few minutes later, someone asked another dangerous question. They wanted to know whether coffee or tea was the better drink. Everyone laughed because we already knew another debate was about to begin. Some people couldn't imagine starting the day without coffee, while others insisted tea was much more relaxing.
That's probably one of the oldest friendly arguments in the world. The funny part is that nobody expects a final answer because there isn't one. People simply enjoy sharing their preferences and listening to everyone else's stories.
I realized something interesting during that dinner. Nobody said, "You're wrong." Instead, people smiled and replied with things like, "I don't see it that way," or "I prefer something different." The conversation stayed relaxed because everyone respected the fact that people don't have to enjoy the same things.
I think that's one reason native speakers sound so natural during conversations. They know how to share their thoughts without turning every disagreement into an argument. Respectful conversations are often much more enjoyable than conversations where everyone is trying to prove they're right.
That's a great reminder for anyone learning English. You don't need to convince everyone to agree with you. Sometimes the goal of a conversation is simply to exchange ideas, hear different perspectives, and enjoy talking together.
If you're enjoying today's conversation, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who's learning English.
In the next part of today's episode, we're going to talk about social media and why confident posts sometimes sound more believable than they really are.
It's a fascinating topic because confidence and truth don't always travel together, and that's something every English learner and every internet user can benefit from understanding.
Our conversation about opinions reminds me of something I've noticed on social media. Have you ever scrolled through your phone for 10 minutes and suddenly felt as if everyone on the internet sounded completely certain about everything? Whether people are talking about fitness, travel, studying, or productivity, they often speak with so much confidence that it's easy to believe every word.
I know exactly what you mean. Sometimes I'll watch a short video where someone confidently explains the best way to learn a language, organize a schedule, or become more productive. They speak so confidently that for a moment, it feels as if their method must work for everyone.
That's what happened to me a few months ago. I was looking for travel advice because I wanted to visit a city I'd never been to before. I watched one video where someone said a particular neighborhood was the only place worth staying. A few minutes later, I found another traveler who said that same neighborhood was far too crowded and recommended somewhere completely different. Both people sounded equally confident, even though they were giving opposite advice.
That's such a common experience. Travel is a perfect example because everyone enjoys different things. One person wants busy streets full of restaurants and shops, while another prefers quiet neighborhoods with parks and cafes. Their experiences are real, but they aren't automatically the same for everyone else.
I noticed the same thing while searching for study tips. One person insisted that waking up at 5 in the morning completely changed their life. Another person explained that they worked much better late at night. Both people seemed happy with their routines, but they clearly had very different lifestyles.
That's why I always remind myself that confidence doesn't automatically mean something is right for everyone. A person can genuinely believe their advice is helpful because it worked for them. That doesn't necessarily mean it will work in exactly the same way for somebody else.
Restaurant reviews are another great example. Last summer, I searched for a place to eat while traveling.
One review described the restaurant as the best in the entire city, while another review called it disappointing. At first, I couldn't understand how people could have such different experiences in the same place.
Then you probably realized they weren't only talking about the food. One person may have had excellent service, while another visited on a very busy day. Someone might love spicy food, while someone else prefers simple flavors. Small differences create completely different experiences.
Exactly. I eventually visited the restaurant myself, and I had a wonderful evening. It wasn't because one review was right and the other was wrong. It was simply because my experience happened to be different.
I think that's an important lesson, not only for learning English, but for everyday life. Listening to different viewpoints helps us understand people better, but it's also helpful to remember that personal experiences naturally vary from one person to another.
That's one reason I enjoy conversations much more than short posts online. Conversations give people time to explain why they think a certain way. Instead of reading one sentence, you hear the story behind it, and that story often changes how you understand the person's opinion.
I completely agree. Stories give opinions context, and once you understand the experience behind someone's words, even a different opinion starts making much more sense.
Speaking of different experiences, movies always remind me how interesting opinions can be. Have you ever watched a film that everyone seemed to love, but when the credits finished, you honestly thought it was just average?
More than once. I remember watching a movie that had amazing reviews online. People described it as unforgettable, emotional, and one of the best films of the year. Naturally, I expected something incredible. When I finally watched it, I enjoyed it, but I didn't have the same emotional reaction everyone else seemed to have.
That's happened to me with books. Sometimes I finish reading a novel that thousands of people recommend, and although I understand why they enjoyed it, it simply doesn't become one of my personal favorites. Then, a few months later, I read a much quieter book that receives very little attention, and I absolutely love it.
That's one reason I enjoy reading reviews after I've already watched a film instead of before. Once I've formed my own thoughts, I like comparing them with other people's experiences. Sometimes I'm surprised by how differently people interpret exactly the same story.
I do the same thing. It's fascinating because people often notice completely different details. One person focuses on the acting, another pays attention to the music, someone else loves the photography, and another person only cares about the storyline. They're all watching the same movie, but they're experiencing it in different ways.
Music works exactly the same way. A song that makes one person feel emotional might leave someone else completely uninterested. That doesn't mean either listener is wrong. It simply shows that people connect with music for different reasons.
Restaurants, books, concerts, museums, travel destinations, they're all similar in that way. Reviews are helpful because they let us hear different perspectives, but they aren't final answers. Eventually, we have to experience things ourselves and decide what we personally enjoy.
That's actually one of my favorite parts of traveling. Before visiting a new city, I enjoy reading what other travelers think. Some people recommend famous attractions, while others encourage visitors to explore quiet streets away from the crowds. Instead of following only one person's advice, I usually combine different suggestions and create my own experience.
I think that's a very balanced approach because listening to different opinions helps us see possibilities we might never have considered. At the same time, it leaves room for us to discover our own preferences instead of simply copying somebody else's.
Looking back, I think that's what today's conversation has really been about. People often experience the same event in completely different ways, and that's perfectly normal. Different opinions don't automatically mean someone is mistaken. They simply remind us that every person sees the world through their own experiences.
That's exactly why conversations are so valuable. There aren't only opportunities to practice English, there are opportunities to understand how other people think, what they enjoy, and why they see the world differently. The more we listen with curiosity instead of immediately judging, the more interesting every conversation becomes.
Everything we've talked about today reminded me of something funny. If someone had asked me 10 years ago whether I liked coffee, I would have answered immediately. I would have said I couldn't understand why people drank something that tasted so bitter every morning.
Now I honestly enjoy sitting with a cup of coffee while reading a book or preparing for work. The coffee didn't change very much. My opinion did.
That's a perfect example because I have a very similar story. When I was younger, I never understood why people enjoyed museums. I thought they were quiet, slow, and probably a little boring. Then I visited one during a trip with some friends, and instead of rushing through the rooms, we spent time reading the stories behind the paintings and old photographs. That single visit completely changed the way I looked at museums.
It's amazing how often that happens. We sometimes speak with complete confidence about something, and a few years later, we find ourselves enjoying the very thing we once avoided. Looking back, I realize I wasn't wrong when I disliked coffee. I simply hadn't experienced it in the same way I do today.
I think growing up naturally changes many of our preferences. I remember refusing to eat certain vegetables when I was a child because I thought they tasted terrible. My parents kept telling me my opinion would probably change one day, and I didn't believe them. Now, some of those same foods are regular parts of my meals, and I actually look forward to eating them.
That reminds me of reading. During school, I only read because I had to. The moment the school year ended, I stopped reading completely. Years later, I picked up a novel while traveling because I had a long train journey ahead of me. By the end of the trip, I had almost finished the entire book. Since then, reading has become one of my favorite ways to relax.
That's why I try not to say I'll never like that. Life has a funny way of surprising us. New experiences, different people, and changing interests quietly influence the way we think without us even realizing it.
I think travel has done that for me more than anything else. Before visiting different countries, I believed I already knew what kind of places I would enjoy. Then I discovered quiet little towns that completely captured my attention, even though I had always imagined I preferred busy cities.
That's one of the best reasons to stay curious. Every new experience gives us another chance to discover something unexpected about ourselves. Sometimes the biggest surprise isn't the place we visit or the food we taste. It's realizing we've become a different person from who we were a few years earlier. Looking back, I don't think changing your opinion is a weakness. In many ways, it's a sign that you're continuing to learn, experience new things, and remain open to different perspectives.
I completely agree. Life would be much less interesting if our opinions never changed. Every conversation, every journey, and every new experience has the potential to teach us something we didn't expect.
Since we've spent today's episode talking about opinions, I've started paying attention to something else. Native speakers don't usually express their opinions in exactly the same way every time. Instead, they naturally choose different expressions depending on the situation and the person they're talking to.
That's very true. Think about a friendly conversation with close friends. People usually sound relaxed because everyone feels comfortable sharing ideas. The goal isn't to win an argument, it's simply to join the conversation and explain what you honestly think.
I noticed that during a conversation at work recently, a group of us were discussing where to go for lunch. Nobody expected everyone to choose the same restaurant immediately. Instead, each person calmly shared their thoughts, listened to other suggestions, and gradually the group reached a decision that everyone was happy with.
That's one thing I really enjoy about everyday English conversations. Native speakers often leave space for other people to speak. Even when they have a strong opinion, they usually present it in a friendly way because they understand someone else may see the situation differently.
I remember watching an interview with two famous actors discussing one of their films. The interviewer asked what their favorite scene was. Instead of giving identical answers, they each explained why different scenes were meaningful to them. Listening to that conversation reminded me that people don't need identical opinions for a discussion to be enjoyable.
Exactly. In fact, conversations often become more interesting when people bring different perspectives. If everyone repeated the same ideas, there wouldn't be much to discover. Respectful disagreement keeps conversations alive because it encourages people to explain their experiences, instead of simply repeating conclusions.
That's another lesson I wish I had learned earlier while studying English. I used to think speaking well meant having perfect grammar all the time. Now I realize communication is much more important. If you can express your thoughts clearly, listen carefully, and respond naturally, people enjoy talking with you regardless of whether every sentence is perfect.
I couldn't agree more. Fluency isn't only about vocabulary or grammar. It's also about confidence, curiosity, and the willingness to listen. Great conversations happen when people genuinely want to understand each other, instead of simply waiting for their own turn to speak.
Before we continue, we'd love to hear from you. What's one movie, book, or television show that almost everyone seems to love, but you didn't enjoy very much? We'd love to read your opinions because they're always interesting, and it's a great opportunity for everyone to practice English together.
That's one of my favorite things about our community. Even when people have completely different opinions, the conversations remain friendly, respectful, and full of interesting stories. That's exactly the kind of environment where language learning becomes enjoyable.
I think that's the biggest lesson from today's episode so far. Learning English isn't about memorizing perfect answers. It's about learning how real people naturally share ideas, respect different perspectives, and enjoy meaningful conversations together.
And the more conversations you listen to, the more naturally those patterns become part of your own English. One day you'll notice that you're no longer searching for every word, because expressing your thoughts simply starts to feel natural.
After everything we've talked about today, I think the biggest lesson has very little to do with vocabulary. It has much more to do with listening. When I was younger, I used to think a conversation was about proving my point. If someone disagreed with me, I immediately started thinking about how to convince them that I was right. Looking back, I realized I spent so much time preparing my next response that I wasn't really listening to what the other person was saying.
I think that's something many people experience. We often confuse listening with waiting. Someone else is speaking, but instead of trying to understand them, we're quietly preparing our own answer. By the time they finish talking, we've already decided what we're going to say.
Exactly. I remember having a conversation with a friend about books. We had completely different opinions about one particular novel. At first, I wanted to explain why I thought it was an excellent book. Then I stopped talking for a moment and simply asked him what he didn't like about it. His answer surprised me because he noticed things I had never even considered.
That's one of the wonderful things about conversations. Even when people disagree, they can still teach each other something. Your friend didn't change the story inside the book, he simply experienced it differently, and listening to his perspective probably helped you understand the book in a new way.
It really did. I still enjoyed the book, but after hearing his explanation, I understood why it wasn't one of his favorites. The interesting part is that I didn't need to agree with him to appreciate his point of view.
I think that's an important distinction. Understanding someone isn't the same as agreeing with them. Sometimes people worry that listening carefully means they're accepting every opinion they hear, but that's not true at all. Listening simply means you're giving another person the chance to explain their experience.
That idea has helped me in so many situations. Family conversations became more enjoyable because I stopped trying to win every discussion. Friendships became stronger because I became more interested in asking questions than giving quick answers. Even at work, meetings became much more productive because people felt comfortable sharing different ideas.
That's because respect creates better conversations than competition. When people feel heard, they're much more willing to listen to each other as well. The discussion becomes about understanding instead of proving who's right.
I think learning English through conversations teaches the same lesson. You're not only learning vocabulary, you're learning how native speakers exchange ideas politely, ask thoughtful questions, and react with curiosity instead of frustration. Those communication skills are just as valuable as grammar.
I couldn't agree more. Language connects people, and the strongest conversations usually happen when everyone feels comfortable sharing different opinions without worrying about being judged.
Well, we've reached the end of today's conversation, and I have to admit this topic became much more interesting than I expected. At the beginning of the episode, I thought we would simply compare two words. Instead, we ended up talking about family dinners, social media, travel, books, movies, friendships, and the importance of listening.
That's one of the reasons I enjoy these conversations so much. Everyday English isn't just about vocabulary. It's about the situations where those words naturally appear. Once you connect language to real experiences, everything becomes easier to remember because you're remembering stories instead of isolated definitions.
When I think back to today's discussion, I remember my family's funny debate about pizza, the different restaurant reviews we talked about, and how our opinions quietly change as we grow older. Those stories remind me that people can look at the same situation and still come away with completely different impressions.
And that's perfectly normal. Different opinions don't automatically create conflict. In many cases, they create better conversations because they encourage people to explain their experiences instead of repeating the same ideas. That's how we learn from one another.
I also hope today's episode encourages everyone to become a little more curious. The next time someone shares an opinion that's different from yours, try asking why they think that way before deciding whether you agree. You may discover an interesting story or experience that completely changes how you understand their point of view.
That's wonderful advice because curiosity makes conversations richer. Instead of ending a discussion with disagreement, curiosity opens the door to learning something new. Even if your own opinion doesn't change, your understanding of another person often becomes much deeper.
I think that's one of the biggest reasons I enjoy learning languages. Every conversation introduces you to different personalities, different experiences, and different ways of seeing the world. Vocabulary helps us speak, but listening helps us connect.
Exactly. The more real English you hear, the more naturally you begin expressing your own thoughts. You also become more comfortable hearing different opinions because you understand that conversations aren't competitions. They're opportunities to exchange ideas respectfully.
If you enjoyed spending time with us today, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who's learning English. Your support helps us continue creating natural English conversations that build confidence one episode at a time.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope today's conversation helped you understand how native speakers naturally separate facts from opinions, and we also hope it reminded you that the best conversations don't happen because everyone agrees. They happen because people are willing to listen, learn, and understand each other. We can't wait to see you again in our next episode.